You probably never imagined when you were in high school and you had a backpack loaded down with books that you were carrying to and from home that you were doing something called rucking. What actually is rucking? What are some of the unique benefits of rucking, particularly for women over 40? And how do you actually get started including this in your fitness routine? We're going to be answering all of that and more on this episode of the podcast. What's going on? Welcome back to the show. I'm so glad that you're with me because I get asked this question all of the time. So many questions about rucking. What is it? How do you get started? How do you do it safely? What are some reasons it might be a better option than running or walking? So we're going to clear up all of that on today's episode. Before we go any further though, hit subscribe on your favorite podcast app if you haven't yet. And if you're watching me on YouTube, hello, make sure you also hit subscribe and hit the bell for more notifications. Rucking is having a bit of a moment recently. It is nothing new per se, but kind of like zone 2 cardio is having this reappearance and more people are talking about it, even though it really never went away. Rucking is very similar. So recently there have been some articles that came out on the New York Times. There was one in Slate. There was one on CNN. You probably have heard other podcasters talking about it. And of course, naturally, that creates a lot of questions. So I'm going to be answering those today on the show for you so that you know, what is it? What counts as rucking? I get that question a lot. Why is it an effective form of exercise? And what are some of the unique benefits for women over 40? How do you begin? What kind of gear do you need? I'm going to be covering all of that on this episode. So I'm also going to be sharing some of the things I've learned from personal experience along the way as I've been rucking now for about a year and a half as of the publication of this episode. I first learned about rucking actually from my husband. He was training for a week-long survival school in Utah. This was in 2022. So early 2022, he started rucking to prepare for the event, which was going to be carrying a backpack, a very rudimentary backpack, by the way, but carrying a backpack for a week through the wilderness in Utah. And so he first got involved with rucking, and it took a few months for me to come around to the idea. He is sort of the early adopter in our family. I'm always the person who kind of stands on the sidelines and just observes for a while before I jump in right away. But once I started rucking myself, I could definitely see where this was a beneficial addition to my fitness routine. And I've been doing it ever since then. So that's how I got started. And then at the beginning of 2023, I decided I wanted to do a rucking event, which I'll probably tell you about toward the end of the podcast. So I knew that I had to get even more serious about adding this into my routine. And it is something that I do 3 to 4 times a week on average, and has been just such a great addition to what I'm already doing. All right, let's start with the simplest question first. What is rucking? Rucking, in the simplest way I can answer this question in one sentence, is carrying load for distance. Carrying load for distance. Now, I'm sure we can imagine that human beings have been carrying things for forever, since the beginning of time. And in a more modern sense, why is it called rucking? The word rucksack is where that term rucking comes from. So rucksacks are these large backpacks that are generally going to be carried by different branches of the military. And so this idea of the military and rucking has inspired the fitness and more recreational form of carrying loads for longer distances that we now call rucking. And as you can imagine, carrying load for distance in a military or a work capacity is going to probably be a bit different from carrying it in a recreational or fitness capacity. So I just want to mention that they're not always going to be the same. And quite frequently, I'll see comments on these articles and people say, you know, I had to ruck in the military and it was really hard on all my joints or things of that nature. And I just want to say, if you're seeing those articles, don't get put off by that. We also need to talk about how to get started and do it in a way that benefits you in a fitness capacity. So don't necessarily be scared off by some of those comments that you might see and past experiences that people have had in the context of having to ruck for some kind of career or job like being in the military. All right, so let's also delineate here what is different between rucking and, say, doing heavy carries in a workout. All right, generally speaking, when we're rucking, we are using a specially designed backpack, and we'll talk about that later, but a specially designed backpack that's going to carry the weight on our back. When we're carrying loads in a workout for strength and building our grip and all of those other things, we might see many different kinds of carries. And I do consider carrying as one of those fundamental compound movement patterns. Dan John writes a lot about that, and he's really inspired how I think about carrying in workouts. But when we are including carries in workouts, like you might see in my Strong with Steph program, generally speaking, we're not carrying for miles at a time. We're carrying for maybe 30 seconds, or we're carrying the load in different ways. So we might bear hug carry. We might carry with one arm above the head in more of a waiter walk. We might carry the load in the front rack. We might do a double farmer carry. So generally speaking, when we're rucking, we're carrying the weight on our back. You may also carry weight on the front if you're going to use a weight vest, and we'll talk about how to get started at the end of the podcast. So just know that if you are carrying as part of your strength workouts, it's going to be a different kind of stimulus than if you are carrying weight over a long distance. We're talking miles here, typically speaking, which we would do in rucking. So next question, why is rucking an effective form of exercise? How can it help you build your fitness in different ways? What are some of the physiological benefits, especially for women? All right, before we go into the benefits and sort of the physiological advantages of doing something like rucking, I want to be really clear. Quite often you'll hear things like rucking can help build lower body strength, or rucking is good for core stability, core strength, postural muscles, etc. And while that may be true, it is not the same as a true strength type of training. What do I mean by that? All right, let's imagine you're going to go rucking with 20 pounds and you're going to go walk 3 miles. You're getting many, many, many repetitions of that as your feet hit the ground. Every single time you stride, you're taking a step, right? So you're putting in many steps over the course of 3 miles. I'm trying to think of how many steps I take in an average 3-mile walk. It's probably somewhere between 6,000 and 7,000 steps. So for me, I'm pretty short. So as I'm walking, right, every time I step, I'm carrying that load on essentially one foot as I go foot to foot. That is not the same kind of strength as doing a back squat for a set of 5. So sometimes we'll talk about strength in a general sense or strength in a more overall sense. But the reason I bring this up is because you may, yes, notice that your feet get stronger, your ankles, your lower legs, your quads, your glutes, that you have more endurance over time. It's easier to maybe hike, for example, go uphill, right? You might notice those things get easier, and that's absolutely possible, but it's still not the same as lifting heavy, challenging weights. And as women over 40, we have got to apply enough mechanical tension to get as much of our muscle fiber to contract as possible, because we do see that decline in estrogen after the menopause transition. And estrogen likely has a role in satellite cell activation, muscle growth. We need to use our muscle fibers, or we start to lose their contractile potential, especially when we're talking about those type 2 fibers. So it's really important here that you not hear me say, because I'm not saying this, that you could just ruck instead of lifting weights. No, we need to notice where we have distinct benefits of each, and also remember that we still have to lift challenging weights. So doing a set of 5 back squats, or a set of 5 deadlifts, or a set of 3 heavy overhead presses, where we're really challenging ourselves and we're really working toward those higher RPEs or higher percentages, that has a distinct benefit for our bodies, especially over 40. And rucking is not going to give us that benefit because the loads are not heavy enough, is essentially what I'm trying to say. So you might have thousands of steps that you're taking with a lighter weight. That's a different kind of sort of strength, almost this endurance effect, if you will, more of a muscular endurance. For example, your postural muscles have built strength as well, or you're just able to maintain posture. a little bit more easily, especially since we do get quite rounded in our current world, that, really walking with that pack has helped you to build strength in those postural muscles. So building strength, certainly an important benefit, just not the same as strength training. Okay. Wanted to clear that up. We see benefits potentially for bone density here. So I also want to say, anytime I talk about bone density, benefit number 2, benefit to your bone. Okay, so we know that as we go through the perimenopause transition, we're having hormonal shifting, things are going up and down, it's a little bit more unpredictable, but then we hit that one day, technically, of menopause, and then after that, we are postmenopausal. And that postmenopausal period is when we're particularly at risk for bone density loss, bone strength loss, and an increased risk of fracture. If we fall and the bone is too brittle and not strong enough, then the bone may break. And this is, of course, a risk to health and longevity. So building bone density and building bone strength is really, really important. And there are different ways to do that with different types of fitness and training, for example, plyometrics, weight-bearing exercise in general, but then also things like strength training. So you're carrying it on your shoulders and you're carrying that weight more over the center of your body, could potentially have some of those benefits. And I always say this just to be sure, before you engage in anything new training-wise, you must get cleared by your medical team. And in particular, if you have a diagnosis of osteopenia or osteoporosis, yes, there may be distinct benefits to carrying load or resistance training or plyometric training, for example, but you do need to make sure that you get cleared by your medical team for that. Number 3, we see improved endurance and cardiovascular capacity. So yes, we need both types of training. I have said this so many times on this podcast. We need to keep our cardiovascular system strong, but we also need to strength train. We need the unique benefits of both. And when we look at the research, we know that more women are meeting cardiovascular minimums than are meeting both cardiovascular and strength training minimums. We cannot forget about strength training. We cannot only lift light all the time. We have gone over that multiple times on this show, but we still do need to keep our cardiovascular system healthy. And when we proceed through the menopause transition, as we age, we see that risk for cardiovascular disease in women particularly tends to go up quite dramatically. So this should be on our minds. Now, there are so many ways you can get cardio in. I mean, the sky is the limit, but a lot of people find that maybe they don't want to run. They don't really like cycling. They can't find a place to do it. They don't have a Peloton. They don't have a place to ride a bike, whatever it is. And they want just a bit more challenge to the walking that they're already doing. This is a really cool way to get a bit more cardiovascular benefit, is just simply by adding weight and carrying that weight on your walk. Really cool. And I've noticed even for myself, if I go on an unloaded walk versus a loaded walk, I put my ruck on, I so much more easily get into zone 2. And a lot of people have been talking about zone 2 cardio. Again, this is not a new thing. It's been around for decades, but for some reason it's having some renaissance. But you can more easily get into zone 2. Normally without load, that would be a really, really brisk walk for me, but I can put on my ruck and fairly casually walk along and get into zone 2. And again, be getting those benefits of zone 2 if I'm able to stay more consistently in that heart rate zone. So it could be one way that you start adding more challenge to your walk, especially if you live in a place that's flat, it doesn't have a lot of hills, or something of that nature. So if you're looking for a way to get more zone 2 that doesn't involve jogging or other types of cardio, and you already have a walking habit, it's kind of a no-brainer. Start carrying a little bit of extra load and you'll see that your heart rate will go up. Number 4, this is going to be lower impact than running. It's not a zero impact activity. And I just want to bring this up because a lot of people are really terrified of any kind of impact. We kind of came from a generation that was all about low impact all the time. And so a lot of people our age, 40s, 50s, and beyond, have it in our minds that impact is a horrible idea for anyone at any time. And we know now that this is detrimental for overall bone health if we're avoiding impact all the time, which is, if you're a cyclist, if you're a swimmer, you still need impact training. If you are getting older, you still need impact training, right? Of course, we have to do it in a way that's progressive and takes your unique situation into consideration and what you need and the pace at which you need to progress. But I will say that if you think, oh, I don't like running, I want something lower impact on my body, or I just would rather take a break from something like running, you can still get out there. You can still enjoy the miles, but just take the intensity down because you're not going super fast, and you put your ruck on and you're still getting a great similar stimulus to running, but you are carrying your ruck instead. Number 5, we see a positive benefit for blood sugar. We've established many times on this podcast that resistance training is a really great way to improve our insulin sensitivity. And again, as we're aging, we're going into our 40s and beyond, we start to see an increased risk, especially for women, of potentially developing more insulin resistance. Exercise is an important part of the process of maintaining better insulin sensitivity. So sensitivity is good, resistance not so good. So insulin sensitivity can be heightened by exercise, including, yes, resistance training, but also things like walking. So get out there, walk, put your ruck on, and that is going to be beneficial for your insulin sensitivity and overall blood sugar levels. And lastly, I just want to highlight a couple of other important benefits. It's great for stress relief. So exercise in general is really great for mood, great for our overall state of mind, being outdoors, being in nature. You can turn this into a more social type of activity as well. So let's say you and your partner used to both enjoy running together, but now you run at different paces. Or if you're like me and you used to be a cyclist, I would always go out on these cycling training rides with the guys, and I would get shot off the back of the pace line every single time. So sometimes when you're doing cardiovascular types of exercise in a group or with a partner, your paces just don't match. And it's really hard to find a way to do it together. Rucking, on the other hand, you each put on your own weight. So for example, Z might carry 45 pounds, I might be carrying 30 pounds. But for us, those loads are appropriate for our bodies, and we're able to walk at relatively the same pace. So rucking is a great way. It's kind of that equalizer where, again, you could go out and walk, but make it a little bit more challenging by adding weight. All right, let's move on to the most common question that I get, which is, how do I get started? What gear do I need? How much should I carry? How long should I go for? And all that stuff. All right, so first and foremost, if you want the quick answer from me on my best recommendation for most people who are interested in rucking for fitness sake, it will be to get a dedicated rucksack that is built specifically for the purpose of rucking. It's going to hold up better over time. It's going to be more comfortable to carry, even though rucking is sometimes uncomfortable. It's going to be the most comfortable option for most people. And if you get it from a great company like GORUCK, they're going to have a great guarantee. So I've been working with GORUCK and partnering with them for well over a year at this point. I adore them as a company. They are fantastic people. They make amazing gear. It is so tough. They do have an incredible guarantee. So it's a lifetime guarantee on their gear. If it breaks, they're going to fix it, or they're going to give you a new one, which gives you hopefully great peace of mind that your purchase and investment is going to be covered. So getting a rucksack that's purpose built for that reason means it's going to have extra padding in the right places. The actual material of the bag is going to be quite tough. The stitching is going to be properly reinforced. The straps are going to be padded enough so they're not going to dig in. And of course, be, again, sewn correctly at those junctions where things tend to wear, like at the top of the bag. You're going to be able to customize it with things that make the bag a bit more comfortable to carry. For example, a hip belt and a chest strap that goes across the chest, and a hip belt which helps you carry the weight and distribute it across the hips as well as the shoulders. You're going to see that rucksacks that are built for that purpose also tend to have a sleeve where you will fit a ruck plate. That ruck plate tends to be flat and rectangular, so it's not going to jostle around in the bag. It's going to be held tight to your back. It's almost like wearing a turtle shell on your back. It's compact. It sits close to the spine. It's not going to sag down like if you've seen like middle schoolers carrying a JanSport backpack and the straps are all the way let out and it's hanging down to their hamstrings pretty much. We want the weight to be up higher. So that's just what you're going to find when you get a ruck that's purposely built for that particular task. However, if you're like, I'm not sure yet, I just want to try it. Am I going to like this before I go in and make a purchase? I totally get that. So what you can do is take a regular backpack, not one of those string backpacks, that have the string straps. Get something that's got some oomph to it, right? Some kind of regular backpack. Then you can put different objects in it to give it some weight. And I'll talk about later about how much weight you might want to start with. But these objects should either be soft or pliable in nature, or you want to wrap them in something to prevent the weight or whatever you put in the bag from digging into your back. So some people want to put a dumbbell in a bag, but a dumbbell, if it's like a hex dumbbell, is going to have those angles and is hard. So wrap it in a towel if that's all you have, or wrap it in bubble wrap, for example. I've also heard of people putting in bags of rice because they are flatter and softer in general. Books, again, wrap those up so that they're not going to jab you in the back when you're walking. But you can start out just to see if you like the concept by using a regular backpack and loading it up with what you have around the house. Recently, I went and visited my family. I went to my mom's. They didn't have anything heavy in the whole house that I could find, but I did find 4 or 5 bottles of wine. It was all I had. So I wrapped those in towels and put those in the back of my GORUCK bag, my regular backpack. And it worked okay, right? It's just for a week. So, sometimes you just have to do what you have to do. You can also use a weight vest. So you want to talk about a hot internet debate, weight vests versus rucksacks. They're different. They have different pros and cons. One isn't necessarily right or wrong, but I think for the majority of cases, if you're not somebody who's going to use that weight vest, like in a workout to add weight to say, for example, pull-ups or weighted squats or something like that, you might envision carrying a little bit more than say 16 to 20 pounds, which is where most weight vests top out. Then getting a bag for the purpose may be your best bet. If you want to go further distances and carry water, a windbreaker, I carry all my sort of GORUCK challenge stuff in my bag anyway. I have a little bit of a first aid kit in there. I've got a headlamp, all sorts of stuff in my bag. But if you want to carry some snacks or whatever it is, carrying a backpack style rucksack is going to let you do that. So weight vests can be good for different people. If you are a large chested person, I will also say weight vests may not be your best option because they just won't sit flat enough to your front of your body and can be quite uncomfortable. But again, your mileage may vary. So consider your options, do a little bit of research and see which one suits you the best. But for most people, I tend to find the ruck is a better option. Also, to finally put this question to bed, you can carry a child and it counts as rucking. So let's say you have a kid carrier. I don't know, what do we call these things? I don't have kids, right? So you have a child carrier, I guess, that you carry on your back or maybe even on the front if they're small enough. But yes, of course, that counts as quote unquote counts as rucking because you're carrying a load on your body and you're carrying for distance. So there you go. A little bit of extra, you got a free ruck for a while the child is small enough, although as they grow and get bigger, you may have to change to something else. The next question, how much weight should you carry? When you're starting out, a general range is 10 to 20 pounds. Some of this is going to depend on how conditioned are you? How's your strength training been? How big of a person are you? If you're a large-bodied human, if you've been training consistently, you have decent upper body strength, and you're pretty fit in terms of cardiovascular fitness, you might be able to go up toward that higher side and vice versa, right? And the reverse. If you're a smaller person, you're less conditioned, you haven't been strength training very much, I would probably opt toward the lower end of that scale. You can always build up slowly but surely. and add and progress over time. But it's just important, just like any other kind of training, strength training, cardio, we don't want to overdo things. When we overdo things compared to the level that we're at and we're not properly progressing, that's when we get hurt. So I see this a lot in the articles that I read online. People say, oh, I started rucking and I loved it so much, and then it injured me. Or, you know, I got stress fractures from rucking. And I really significantly question, what is that person doing? If we're loading it in a reasonable fashion, we are not overdoing our training, we are recovering properly. That includes nutritionally, sleep-wise. We're not going too hard, too long, too heavy, too soon, and we are properly progressing, we are going to minimize or mitigate our risk of injury. If we decide to throw caution to the wind and we're going to ruck every single day and we just started and we get really into it and we start carrying too heavy too soon, then of course, just like any other kind of training, perhaps the risk of injury could increase. So we need to be sensible here, just like any other kind of training. And so how often then should you ruck? It completely depends. But when you're starting out, what is a sensible frequency? I would say 2 to 3 times a week. Start off shorter and build up. So maybe you go for 15 to 30 minutes, again, depending on your current state of conditioning, and you can build up from there. Maybe you start for half an hour. If you're a little bit more conditioned, you're more used to walking. And that's also what I would say here. You are also still walking when you're rucking. You're just walking with weight. And a lot of people don't have a consistent walking practice yet, and your feet are just not used to walking for 30 minutes at a time or more. So we also want to make sure that we're remembering that if we don't have a good base of walking underneath us, that we want to start more conservatively with that as well. But for a lot of people, they're going to be able to do 2 to 3 times a week, maybe a half an hour at a go, maybe a little bit less depending on your current state of fitness. The bottom line is not to go too hard, too fast, too soon, or too heavy. And then how do you progress? Well, when you start noticing that you're more consistently able to do those 30-minute walks or whatever it happens to be, and the weight is feeling pretty easy, then maybe consider adding a little bit of weight. I would say for most people, we're talking about 2 to 5 pound jumps. Again, a 5-pound jump doesn't sound like a lot, but if you extrapolate that out over several miles, you're going to start to feel it. So you might decide to get your fractional plates from your weight set. If you have one, those are the little plates, and maybe you have a 2.5 pound plate and you put that in, or maybe you slide in a light bag of rice or something like that. Sometimes I've heard people will do different incremental bags and like that's their in-between weight. It just depends. So start adding a little bit as you get comfortable with those distances and those times and things are starting to feel easier. Remember that proper recovery matters just like any other kind of training. So don't overdo it. Pay attention to your body. If things are too sore or you need to stretch more, do more mobility work, don't ignore that shit. That's when injuries and injury risk pile up, is when, just like any other kind of training, we kind of ignore those things and put them to the wayside. The last question I get a lot is, what kind of footwear do I need to wear for rucking? And I'll say, again, if you're casual, you're first starting to get into this, just wear whatever athletic shoes you're comfortable with, you're used to, and that give you enough support through your feet. But if you are looking for increasing your distance, increasing the weight that you're carrying, you might find that something with a bit more support is going to benefit you, just to give your foot that stable platform as you add weight. So it's really going to depend. I've seen all sorts of footwear at different GORUCK events. For example, trail running sneakers all the way through boots, depending on how much traction, high top, low top. I mean, the answer here is, it's like, what's going to be the best for your feet and what works for you. I will say for me, I tend to find having a bit more of a stable platform is helpful, especially as I'm carrying upwards of 30 pounds, 35 pounds, even closer to 40 pounds. That for me translates into my feet feeling better supported over the distance. And you can check out For example, GORUCK has a lot of purpose-designed footwear for this reason. But again, if you're casual and you're starting out, you probably don't need to go worry about that right off the bat because you're not going to be carrying as long or as heavy. Last, I just wanted to talk about some of the other cool fitness components of rucking. So there are different rucking events, whether it's casual group get-togethers. There are ruck clubs all around the country and around the world. Quite frankly, we have an amazing ruck club here in San Diego. So shout out to Triton Ruck Club and everybody over there. They're a really welcoming, amazing group of people. So if you're looking to kind of get that community feel and you'd like to ruck with other people, then check out if your area has a local ruck club. You might be surprised, and they're popping up everywhere. On the fitness and event side of things, if you are a more competitive person and you'd like to explore that, you have some really cool options. First, you have things like GORUCK challenges, and there are other organizations that put together challenges of this nature that involve rucking to some degree, whether it's purely rucking for distance or time, or it's rucking in the context of a group challenge, like what we did with the GORUCK challenges this year, which was a huge goal of mine, was to complete a 12-hour GORUCK challenge, which we did in early October here in San Diego. We walked 17 miles with our rucks, and we also did some other physical challenges, and it was mentally and physically very challenging, but also very gratifying and rewarding. And they have longer events than that and shorter events if you're looking for something that's a bit of an easier progression to get into. But there are also existing events like High Rocks, there's DecaFit, and I'm sure others who have a rucking division now, which is really, really cool. So if you're somebody who just wants to embrace that competitive aspect, or you really like that group fitness, doing something hard together kind of element to it, then definitely check out what's out there. It can be a great way for you to connect with that competitive part of yourself, or just get out and experience rucking in that way and put your fitness to the test. So you can find those events, just give them a Google, or you can find the GORUCK challenges and similar events like the STAR course, for example, on GORUCK.com. Let's go ahead and wrap up this episode about rucking. First, we covered what is rucking. Secondly, we went into some of the benefits of rucking and why, as a woman over 40 who's interested in improving your fitness in a variety of ways, rucking is something to possibly consider. We also went over some of the very most common questions that people ask about rucking, including what kind of gear do I need? How much should I start with in terms of weight? How far should I go? And how should I progress my training? I hope this episode was useful for you. If you're looking for rucking gear that really is going to go the distance, check out GORUCK. My code for 10% off is FUELYOURSTRENGTH. And if you love rucking, then go ahead and send me a message in the comments below. Let me know, what do you really like about it? What's been your favorite part? And if you haven't started yet, what are you most curious about? Thanks so much for joining me on this episode today. And until next time, stay strong.